Part 1. Love Illusions and the Lie You Were Sold. There's a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche that slices right through all of the noise. Sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed. That's where we start today. Because you were told something from the very beginning, from childhood stories, from love songs, from Hollywood endings, that one day someone would come and make everything okay. That love would save you, that it would be pure, redemptive, unconditional, that the right woman would heal your broken parts, that she'd see the best in you even when you couldn't see it in yourself. And you believed it, not because you were naive, not because you were weak. You believed it because no one ever gave you the tools to question it. They never told you that sometimes the most dangerous lies aren't the ones you're told, they're the ones you want to believe. The ones that feel so good, so comforting, that you never stop to ask if they're even real. But what if they're not? What if that whole promise that one day someone will come and make everything better was never meant to be kept? What if the love you've spent your life chasing isn't salvation at all but strategy? And what if nature, not just the world outside us, but the nature inside us, saw all of this coming? Because nature doesn't write fairy tales. It writes with a scalpel. It cuts through the fluff, through the myths, through the emotional safety nets we wrap around our egos. And when you really look, when you strip away the poetry, the sentiment, the conditioning, what you find isn't always pretty. It's not romantic. It's not soft. But it's real. And most men, they're not ready for that kind of truth. Because here's what it exposes. You don't love her. You love the version of her that reflects the version of yourself you wish you were. You love the way she validates you, the way her presence seems to whisper, "You're enough." But that's not love. That's validation. And validation is not love. What you call love might just be a carefully curated illusion that keeps you emotionally obedient. Let's go deeper. Women, especially in the past, weren't handed power. They weren't given swords. They weren't offered titles, land armies. So they learned to fight with something else. Silence, suggestion, influence. Not because they're manipulative by nature, but because they had to operate from the shadows while men ruled the light. They weren't allowed to confront, so they shaped. They learned to mold, not muscle, to suggest, not demand. And that's where most modern men still don't get it. You confuse strategy for softness. You mistake adaptability for innocence. You look at her and think, she's gentle, she's nurturing, she's pure. But what if none of that is actually true? What if what you're calling tenderness is actually power refined, rehearsed, executed with precision? Because while you're out here spilling your emotions and calling it vulnerability, she's listening, watching, scanning, not because she wants to hurt you, but because her survival has always depended on knowing more than she says. While you dream of soulmates, she's calculating the cost of closeness, weighing need against control, desire against influence, not to be cruel, but because she has to. Because in the game of modern relationships, the one who sees the game but doesn't speak of it wins. And what about you? You were raised to idealize her, to put her on a pedestal so high you couldn't see the person behind the performance. You weren't taught to question her behavior. You were taught to worship it, to see her as the healer, the good girl, the emotional anchor. But What if that's not who she is? What if those are just masks? Masks she learned to wear because they work. Nietzsche didn't say these things to destroy women. He said them to destroy the stories men tell themselves about women. Because as long as you believe she's morally superior by nature, as long as you believe her affection is unconditional, as long as you believe her love is free of motive, you will keep surrendering your agency over and over in exchange for emotional safety. And she'll accept that power, not because she hates you, but because the system taught her to use it. You are not being loved. You're being handled. And the scariest part, you like it that way. You like the comfort. You like the worship. You like the emotional anesthesia that lets you avoid yourself. Because the second you stop needing her to be your redemption, you're forced to confront the one thing that terrifies you more than heartbreak, the void inside yourself. But fear doesn't always look like fear. It wears disguises, and one of its favorites, romantic devotion. You think you're loving her purely. You think you're giving your heart with courage. But what you're actually offering is a bargain. If I give you everything, will you fix the parts of me I don't want to face? That's not love. That's a transaction. You're not seeking a partner. You're seeking a solution. And while you offer your soul thinking its vulnerability, she's listening, not to your words, but to your needs. Not because she's evil, because every vulnerability you share is a map of your emotional pressure points, a map of your inner child, your trauma, your fear. And she learns it quickly, not to destroy you, but to position herself in your psyche so that she becomes indispensable. That's not manipulation. That's adaptation. That's instinct. That's survival. Part 2. The uncomfortable power behind love. Nietzsche understood something that most of us, especially men, spend our lives running from. That what we call love is often a subtle contest for emotional real estate. Who controls the rhythm of closeness? Who withholds first? Who gives in last? These are not acts of affection. They're moves in a game of power. And here's the part that makes most people flinch. The one who needs less controls more. You're giving everything, your time, your focus, your identity, and you think that's love. You think that's honesty. But she's not giving you the same thing. She gives you just enough to keep you chasing. You call it connection. But it's not connection. It's choreography. We've built a culture where women are taught to influence without appearing to lead, and where men are taught to submit while believing they're in control. It's not her fault. It's not your fault. It's a system one built on centuries of imbalance. Men were taught to dominate the outer world, so women mastered the inner one. And now, in the modern landscape of love, you walk right into that dynamic, smiling. She doesn't have to argue. She only has to suggest. She doesn't have to demand. She just has to desire. And in doing so, she shapes your behavior, your decisions, your identity, without ever raising her voice. That's not manipulation. That's mastery. You call her mysterious because you don't understand her. You don't understand her because you've never questioned the stories you were told about what love is. You still think love is about unity. She knows love is about leverage. And when she pulls away, when she withholds affection, when she becomes distant, it haunts you, not just because she's gone, but because your reflection left with her. Nietzsche would say, you never really loved her. You loved the way she made you feel about yourself. She was the stage where you performed your worth. Now the stage is gone, and you're standing alone in silence with the truth. And here's the harshest part of that truth. She didn't deceive you. She just stopped playing the role you wrote for her. You didn't see her. You saw your idea of her. And when she stopped living inside that fantasy, you called her cold. You called her cruel. But maybe, just maybe, the real betrayal was yours. You loved a fantasy, and you expected her to be the actress who lived in it forever. Nietzsche didn't condemn women. He condemned men who refused to grow up, men who chase muses instead of seeing mirrors, men who beg for angels instead of daring to love real, complex, flawed, powerful human beings. If you're ready to stop blaming her, then you're finally ready to look at yourself, not with guilt, not with shame, but with clarity. And from clarity, something radical is possible. Not the end of love, but its transformation. You were taught that love is the highest virtue, that to love selflessly is what makes you a good man. But what if that selflessness is just another mask, a mask for emotional dependency? Because underneath all the poetic gestures, the late-night texts, the grand declarations, there's a quiet fear whispering, if I don't give everything, she won't stay. So you offer more, you compromise more, you erase parts of yourself just to become what you think she wants. Not because you love her, but because you fear being without her. And that's not nobility, that's submission disguised as romance. And while you think you're being brave, she feels something else entirely. Control, not through dominance, but through presence, through your willingness to orbit around her approval. Because here's the uncomfortable truth Nietzsche hinted at, and that few are willing to hear. Love, when rooted in need, is never equal. She may not ask you to change, but you change anyway. She may not demand your obedience, but you give it anyway. Why? Because you've convinced yourself that her acceptance is your salvation. But here's the twist. She never asked to be your savior. She was just being herself. And you turned that into a mirror of your worth. And when that mirror cracked, you didn't just feel loss, you felt collapse. Because it wasn't just her you were protecting, it was the story. The story that says, if she loves me, I am whole. If she stays, I matter. But stories aren't truth. And when reality breaks in, you call it betrayal. Nietzsche would call it an awakening. The lie wasn't that she had power. The lie was that you didn't see it. You called her gentle, but she was observant. You called her nurturing, but she was strategic. You thought she surrendered, but she was choosing, always choosing. Because she understood something you never did. The one who sees the dynamic clearly holds the key. And now, finally, maybe for the first time, the illusion is starting to crack. You remember all those little moments when she smiled, but something behind it was calculating. When your smallest emotional shifts were answered before you even voiced them. You thought she was intuitive, and she was. But that intuition, that wasn't magic. That was survival. It was her way of staying a step ahead in a world that never gave her institutional power, only relational power. This isn't about blame. This is about reality. You live in a world where love is marketed as mutual surrender, but practiced as mutual leverage, where vulnerability is branded as a virtue but used as currency. And once you realize that, you have a choice. You can break down, or you can grow up. Most men break. They run back to the myth. They look for another muse, another emotional performance partner. They say, this time it'll be different. But it never is, because the roles haven't changed. Only the actors have. Part 3. The mask is slipping. Seeing her clearly for the first time. But what happens when the mask is finally gone? When the story you've clung to, the one that said love is supposed to be salvation, supposed to complete, you starts to crack wide open. What's left? Not the fantasy, not the muse, not the dream girl who never fails, never doubts, never calculates. What's left is a human being, one who's not trying to manipulate you but to survive, one who doesn't want to control you but has only ever known control as a form of safety, one who wasn't born with institutional power, so she mastered relational power because that's all she had. You thought her emotional intelligence was just a natural gift. But what if it's a form of adaptation? What if her ability to read you, to anticipate your mood, your needs, your silences, isn't mystical at all? What if it's the result of centuries of generational memory, passed down from women who had to read men in order to stay alive? That's not manipulation, that's evolution. And when you finally begin to see her clearly, not through the lens of your longing, not through the myths you inherited, but through the eyes of reality, you understand something profound. She is not your redeemer. She is not your rescue. She is not the answer to your emptiness. She is a person, complex, strategic, tender, strong, afraid, capable. She doesn't want to be your everything. She just wants to be real. And maybe for the first time in your life, that terrifies you more than anything else. Because now you have to meet her as an equal, not as someone who exists to validate you, not as someone who owes you healing, but as someone who mirrors your unfinished work. And that's the part most men aren't ready for. You've been conditioned to believe that if you just love hard enough, sacrifice deep enough, give endlessly enough, that she will stay, that she will love you back the same way. But it doesn't work like that, because love isn't a vending machine, and she isn't an audience for your performance. She's a participant in her own story, and in that story, your worth is not based on how much you give, but on how much you see, how much clarity you have, how much sovereignty you reclaim, and most importantly, how much truth you're willing to carry without turning it into bitterness. You say, I gave her everything, but was it really love, or was it fear dressed up as generosity? You say, so she left me. But did she leave you, or did she leave the performance you demanded she keep playing? You say she changed, but maybe, just maybe, she stopped playing small for your comfort. And when she did, your illusion fell apart. Nietzsche warned us not to romanticize suffering or confuse illusion with truth. And yet, here you are suffering because the script you believed about love didn't survive reality. Good. That's where it should break. Because only after the illusion collapses can something real begin. Something mutual, something equal, something that isn't built on rescue fantasies or emotional dependency, but on two people who have come home to themselves. But that only happens when you're done with the pedestal, When you're done pretending she's more innocent than you, more virtuous, more emotional, more pure. When you stop seeing her as a mirror of your worth and start seeing her as her own force. It's not that she's been playing you, it's that you've been playing yourself, trying to earn a kind of love that only exists in songs and stories, not in the raw, messy, layered reality of adult human connection. And maybe now you're starting to see why the love you've known has always felt so unstable, why it swelled with promise in the beginning, then collapsed into resentment and confusion. Because when you love from illusion, you always end up betrayed, not by her but by your own story. The pedestal becomes a prison, the muse becomes a mirror, and the dream becomes a cage you both get trapped in. So, what now? Now, you face yourself. You face the need to be needed. You face the ache for validation. You face the story that says your worth is measured by whether or not she stays. You stop asking, why didn't she love me the way I loved her? And you start asking, why did I make her love the measurement of my worth? Because here's the thing, most men never realize until it's too late. When you give away your center to someone else, no matter how beautiful, kind, or loving they are, you will always live in fear of losing it. That fear isn't love, it's dependency. That worship isn't connection, it's submission. And the woman you think you need to complete you, she doesn't want to be your God. She doesn't want to be your crutch. She doesn't want to be your mission. She just wants to be seen as human, not exalted, not controlled, not idealized. And until you can love her without needing her to complete you, you'll never really love her at all. Part 4. The emotional currency of modern love. Let's talk about the currency of modern love. And no, I'm not talking about gifts or gestures. I'm talking about emotional currency, attention, validation, vulnerability, reassurance, submission. The stuff we trade back and forth in relationships, often without realizing it's a transaction at all. We like to pretend that love is pure, that it floats above the messy stuff, untouched by psychology or power. But in the real world, love operates in systems, and every system has currency. Here's what Nietzsche understood that most people still can't stomach. The one who needs less controls more. And that principle plays out everywhere in relationships. You think you're being vulnerable, offering your soul, baring your heart, opening yourself completely. But vulnerability isn't free. It comes with expectation. You want her to match it, mirror it, reward it. But what if she doesn't? What if she's reading your vulnerability not as connection, but as leverage? She's not a villain for doing that. She's playing the same game you are, just better. Why? Because she's been taught since birth how to operate in emotional economies. While you were taught to initiate, she was taught to respond. While you were taught to conquer, she was taught to influence. And while you were taught to express, she was taught to interpret. You think she's passive? She's not. She's strategic. She doesn't need to control you with force. She can do it with timing, with withholding, with silence. She learned to read your patterns, to decode your moods, to understand your emotional diet, often better than you understand it yourself. And she uses that understanding not always consciously, but instinctively, to get what she wants, to protect her space, to shape her world. You don't see this happening because it doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like love. It feels like love. And maybe that's the most dangerous illusion of all. Because when manipulation feels like care, you start mistaking control for affection. She doesn't need to say, "Do this." She just needs to sigh at the right moment, tilt her head, look away, and you shift. You offer more. You bend. Not because she's demanding anything, but because you've become addicted to her approval. And why wouldn't you? Approval is a drug, especially when it comes from the person you've built your identity around. So you double down, you perform. You think, maybe if I give her more, she'll stay. But let's be real. You're not building a relationship. You're negotiating a hostage situation where your self-worth is the ransom. And here's the dark twist. She may not even be aware she's doing this. She might genuinely think she's loving you back because the performance is so deeply ingrained in both of you, it feels natural. You offer. She accepts. You chase. She grants. You give. She allows. You both think this is love, but what it really is imbalance. She doesn't need to dominate you. She just needs you to keep needing her. That's where the power is. And here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. The system that taught her this, it's the same one that taught you to chase her approval like it was the Holy Grail. You were both conditioned to play roles that reinforce each other. She was taught to be the prize. You were taught to prove your worth. She was taught to be desired. You were taught to pursue. She was taught to be the emotional center. You were taught to orbit. And now you wonder why the relationship feels off, why you feel anxious, why you feel like you're never enough, like you're always chasing something just out of reach. Because you are. And the longer you keep chasing her validation instead of reclaiming your center, the more you become a servant to an illusion. Here's something most men never stop to ask. Why do I believe love is something I need to earn? Because if you truly believed you were enough, if you had agency, sovereignty, wholeness, you wouldn't need to trade your soul for scraps of affection. You'd love differently. You'd connect from fullness, not from fear. You'd choose her, not need her. And she would feel that shift. At first, she might resist it. Not because she wants control, but because the game has changed. The dynamic she's familiar with is gone. And that might scare her, because she too has been conditioned to believe that control equals safety. So when you stop orbiting, when you stop performing, when you stop needing her approval like air, she won't know how to respond. She might pull away. She might test you. She might say you're cold or different. And that's okay, because you are different now. You're not here to be someone's emotional puppet. You're here to be whole with or without her. You're not rejecting love. You're rejecting the illusion that love has to mean submission. You're choosing clarity over comfort, truth over tenderness, agency over addiction. And if that makes you unromantic, so be it. Romance built on performance is a prison. You're not here to be someone's ideal man. You're here to be a real man, one who sees, one who chooses, one who leads not just in action, but in emotional sovereignty. You don't need her to make you whole. You need you. Let her love be a gift, not a requirement. Let your presence be a choice, not a chase. Only then can love be real. Only then can connection be equal. Only then can you see each other clearly, honestly, without the fog of fantasy. Part 5. Love without illusion. The end of the fantasy, the start of freedom. So now what? You've peeled back the layers. You've seen through the mask. You understand not just her, but yourself. And everything you once thought was love now looks different, colder, sharper, maybe even lonelier. But that's only because clarity feels like loss at first. The myth is gone, the dream is broken, and what's left isn't a fairy tale, it's reality. And reality is where real love begins, not in the emotional theater, not in the fantasy roles, not in the performance of purity or the worship of affection, but in the place where two whole imperfect people meet without needing to be completed, redeemed, or adored. Let's talk about that man you're becoming. You used to give and give, hoping it would be enough. Now, you give from strength, not from fear. You used to chase approval, mistaking it for connection. Now, you hold your own presence. You don't ask to be seen, you're seen by yourself. You used to make her your source. Now, she's your companion, not your salvation. And that changes everything. It changes how you speak, how you show up, how you hold space not for validation, but for truth. You're not emotionally distant. You're emotionally disciplined. You're not cold. You're clear. You're not indifferent. You're independent. And here's what no one tells you what Nietzsche hinted at, but never said plainly. The man who can walk away walks free. Not because he's angry, not because he's bitter, but because he's no longer bound by illusion. That doesn't mean you become a monk. It doesn't mean you close your heart. It doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you start loving differently, with eyes wide open, with grounded presence, with clarity that pierces through emotional manipulation and sees what's real. You stop playing roles. You stop seeking performances. And you definitely stop begging for love dressed up as leverage. You become unavailable to the kind of love that depends on your emotional obedience. You become a man who sees her clearly, not as an angel, not as a savior, not as the cure to your inner wounds, but as a human being, a woman, complex, capable, intelligent, strategic, maybe even dangerous. And because you see her for all that, she is not just the parts that serve your self-worth. Now you can actually love her. Not worship, not submit, not project, but love. That kind of love, it's rare. It doesn't look poetic. It looks like power meeting power, clarity meeting clarity. Two people meeting not to complete each other, but to witness each other. No roles, no pedestal, no savior stories. Just real raw presence. And yes, many women will walk away from that because they weren't taught to be seen like that. They were taught to perform, to be the good girl, the muse, the healer. When you refuse to participate in the fantasy, it'll feel uncomfortable, even confrontational. But that discomfort, it's a filter. It separates those who crave the myth from those who crave the real. And when you find a woman who also sees, who also dropped the mask, that's when something truly powerful begins. Not control, not dependence, not leverage, but partnership. Because now there's nothing left to perform. No emotional dance, no bargaining for affection, no unspoken rules about who gives more and who withholds first. Just truth, presence, and choice. This is the transformation Nietzsche pointed toward, even if he said it in riddles and fire. The man who awakens from illusion no longer begs for love. He invites it. He doesn't fear her leaving because he's not afraid of being alone. He doesn't fear her power because he no longer gives away his own. He doesn't confuse vulnerability with submission. He doesn't chase affection as proof of worth. He lives inside out, not outside in. He doesn't orbit her emotions. He leads with his vision. He doesn't need her to worship him. He needs her to see him truly as he is. And if she can't, he walks not out of pride, but out of peace, because he finally understands love is not salvation. It's synergy. And if synergy doesn't exist, no amount of sacrifice will create it. So let me ask you now that the myth is dead. Who are you? Not the man she shaped, not the man you thought she wanted, not the fantasy of worthiness you built in her gaze, but you, sovereign, clear present. What do you want? Are you still looking for a goddess to forgive your shame? Or are you ready for a woman who meets your strength with her own? Are you still trying to trade yourself for belonging? Or are you finally grounded enough to belong to yourself? Because that's the revolution. Not in her, in you. In how you see, how you choose, how you lead. Love without illusion. Power without control. Presence without performance. That's the path. And yes, it's lonelier at first, but it's cleaner, stronger, real. And in that realness, something unshakable begins. A man no longer ruled by myth. A man no longer seduced by roles. A man who doesn't need love to validate him because he brings love with him. This is your power. This is your clarity. This is your freedom. If this message hit a nerve, if it shattered the script you've been following for years, then it was meant for you. You're not broken. You're waking up. And now your only job is to stay awake. Like, share, subscribe. Not to support me, but to support the man you're becoming. Because men like you, clear-eyed, wholehearted, awake, you don't just change your relationships. You change the world. Cheers!